Well, James, I am really excited to be talking to a fellow Bostonian or Cambridgian, however we say this. Thank you for joining the show today.
You're so welcome. Thank you so much for having me. I'm thrilled to be here.
Of course. And I do want to, as I said in the pre-intro, but I don't know if you met her, but there's a woman named Julie De Silva that I actually worked with back in my days at Fidelity Investments. She's a regular listener of the show, and I want to give her a shout out because one night she sort of pinged me. She's like, Aaron, I've got a guy that you have to have on your show. I just saw him speak, and she gave me your details, which is how we came to meet. And we'll talk a little bit more about that particular event that you went to. But I do want to let Julie know we appreciate you connecting us, Julie. And if future, if listeners want to make recommendations of guests, we're always happy to have them. Let's start with your background, James. And this is one of the things I love about doing this show is I get a lot of people with very different backgrounds where I was like, how did we get here? So your work spans youth addiction, neuropsychology, and now the mental health impacts of climate change, which I'm really excited to sort of dig into. What led you to choose this important field of work?
Yeah, great question. I have a convoluted path, I guess. I first got exposed to psychology in high school, actually, which was pretty radical. I grew up outside Liverpool, and it wasn't such a big thing in like the 90s. And so I took a psych class and just fell in love with it. It was awesome. And I was a bio major and eventually got more interested in sciences and went to undergrad in Scotland, focusing on marine biology. So totally different than psychology. So I did marine biology for a bit. Organic chemistry killed me. I'd never worked so hard in my life to get a C. And I just thought, I don't know if I could do this. And at the same time, I was sort of a double major in psych, and some family stuff happened. My brother got addicted to substance use and fell into depression, and then tragedy happened where he committed suicide when I was in my sophomore year of college. And so felt like, what am I doing? I was sort of really affected by this and pivoted to kind of really work on, mental illness and mental health, and particularly how it affects the family. So worked at UCLA for a little bit during a junior year abroad there, and got connected with researchers, and eventually went back to UCLA after I finished my undergrad and ditched the marine biology piece, although still love dolphins. But I eventually applied for my PhD in clinical child psychology. Was very interested in kids. My parents were both worked with kids a lot. My dad with kids with disabilities, and my mom was sort of a teacher with kids. So loved kids and always was kind of hanging out with them, and was very interested in trying to catch things early, in ways that my family didn't have the chance to do, and try and shift things before, mental health really takes root. And so that sort of got me interested in psychology. My PhD was in child psychology. I studied addiction and the family, and then eventually made my way to Mass General, and been doing that and working in the addiction medicine department in psychiatry for maybe 13, 14 years at this point. But the environment, the climate has always been sort of a passion of mine, and I've always been interested in that. And then around sort of 2019, I was like, okay, like I'm really loving addiction work, but there's this sort of gnawing part of me that wants to get involved in nature and climate. And a couple of my patients, I work with adolescents most of the time, so to bring in climate and the environment into therapy sessions. And I was like, okay, what's going on here? And so anyway, did a lot of reading, research, retraining, and sort of have been focusing in the last sort of several years on sort of two hats. I still work in addiction, yet also now work in climate change and youth mental health. So bit of a winding road to this, but here I am.
It's a beautiful winding road. And
Thank you.
I will get into the climate change, and we're going to spend some time on that because that was the purpose. And I'm particularly fascinated by that work. I do have a side note, and this is as a fellow Bostonian, as I mentioned up front. When you and I first jumped on and we were talking, I noted an accent, and I couldn't quite tell him, like, is that a Boston accent or is that a British accent? You confirmed British accent. And this is, fascinating probably to anyone that knows. I know people love to make fun of or enjoy Boston accents, anyone that's watched Good Will Hunting or some of the other
Yeah.
other movies that, lean into that. But
Yeah.
it is how we got our accent, right? It was an evolved version of the British accent that landed as the Boston accent. So you're hearing James, who's seemingly flattened his British accent and has a teeny bit of that sort of translated into a Boston accent, all in one fell swoop. So sorry, I couldn't help
Exactly.
but mention that. I do want to talk about the youth addiction piece. And first of all, bless you for doing the work you're doing.
Thank you.
I've had a family that's had a lot of mental health issues, some addiction issues. And so people like yourself that are taking the time, particularly with children or adolescent, we need way more of you. So I love that you're doing this.
Thank
I
you.
want to talk a little bit about your work as the clinical director of the Addiction Recovery Management Service. You've worked closely with adolescents navigating substance use alongside other mental health challenges, because clearly the two go hand in
Yep.
hand and actually can be causal, I think, both ways, right? That people don't always understand.
Yep.
Let's talk about the most misunderstood aspects of youth addiction today, and how should families and clinicians shift their approach to better engage teens? Because I think, one, there's a little bit of a pull yourself up by the bootstraps. Like we, had it hard, when we were young. They don't understand the difference in like the climate, to like the broader sort of the environment we live in, right? And the political climate and all those things. But they also, I don't think, understand that we've evolved a lot and learned a lot, and maybe a lot of the things that when undiagnosed, like anxiety or ADHD or whatever, are like, oh no, these are real things and they're big problems, and it's not a pull yourself up by the bootstraps kind of thing. So, long-winded question, but give us your thoughts on that front.
Yeah, thanks for raising that kind of question. I think, youth addiction for me is particularly critical because we know 75% of actual mental health issues onset in adolescence and childhood. So, any adult with a psychiatric issue by and large has probably started that when they were kids or a teen. So really honing in on that age group is critical. I think in the addiction space right now, the challenge we're having is honestly cannabis, which we could do a whole podcast on cannabis for sure. It's just a real challenge. Like we used to see back in the 2018, 2019, right, when opiates were really an issue, and that was sort of the big challenge. Overdose rates were a nightmare, and it was most of our clinic was at 40 to 50% of folks were coming to us with opiate use disorders. Thank God that's changed because it was a total nightmare, and so it's really dropped now. But now we're seeing like 80 to 90% of kids dependent on cannabis. And so for most people, cannabis is not a problem, right? Just like most people can drink alcohol and not have a problem. But the big misunderstanding is that you can get addicted to cannabis. It's real. There's a withdrawal phenomenon. It can ruin your life like you can with alcohol and opiates. And so it is a real tricky issue to kind of deal with. There's a ton of misinformation about cannabis, and so I work a lot with parents to navigate this landscape, and they're facing, oh, it's fine, it's a herb, it's, legal, it's okay. Yet they're sort of stealing money to buy it. They're falling asleep in class. They're high all the time. And the potency of cannabis now is like, it's not your grandfather's weed, is what we sort of say, right? Like the 70s and 80s, it was like 3%, and kids vape now 90%. It's like, it's totally different. So that's a big challenge that we're facing now as a field. And we don't have great treatment, to be honest. It's a real tricky issue to deal with.
Well, and can I insert something? Because I've seen this like up close and personal. I think the other problem that you fall into this trap of, it can help with anxiety, right? It can help with some of the dark spots, but if you do it too much, then it does start to lead to actually having the opposite effect. And so I think it's easy to go down that slippery slope for the very reasons you mentioned, especially because I live in the state of California, you live in the state of Massachusetts. It is legal where we are. I think in some ways it's probably easier on the body than alcohol is, depending on how you do it and where you do it. But it does feel a little bit like, oh, it's just pot, right? And I think people, do forget about the percentage of the THC in whatever they're smoking or digesting or,
Right.
inhaling. And two, it is that sort of, because it's so much more available, and I think there's so much more societal acceptance of it. And look, I partake and have partaken,
Sure.
and I don't judge, but taken or done the wrong way can absolutely have really dramatically bad effects. So I do appreciate you pointing all those things out.
Yeah, for sure. And I think the challenge is that early onset cannabis is the problem because the brain is still really vulnerable to development, and cannabis unfortunately has some negative impacts on brain development. So that's why we worry about high potency early onset cannabis in kids. Yeah. And it's, it's the ninth most harmful substance when they stack them all together. And so it's not the most bad for you and it's not the least bad. It's sort of somewhere in the middle. But for most people, like you said, can partake and not have a problem. But those with addiction histories, mental illness, and young people, we do worry about the high potency stuff and a lot of risks there. Yeah.
Yeah, well, before people get too nervous that we're going to spend, 45 minutes pot shaming them, we are going to shift a little bit and we're going to talk a little bit about climate change. And so, as I mentioned up front, my friend Julie saw you at Change is Simple's Coffee and Climate event. So
Yep.
Change is Simple is the organization, and you gave a talk. And you talked about the intersection of climate change and youth mental health. And this is the thing that really intrigued me because of course, like once you start to think about it, it's a no-brainer that that would be a thing. But I don't think many people do think about that. And
Hmm.
once you do, it's like, oh yeah, that might actually be one of the things that's causing a lot of problems today. So for those that weren't in the room, what is the single most important, quote, simple change we can make in how we discuss the environment with the next generation?
Yeah, I think it's a really great question, and I was so honored to give that talk. It was a great organization that's doing a lot of great stuff in education for youth and climate and STEM. I think really it's sort of to take it seriously, to your point, right? I think that young generations sort of feel abandoned by adults. There's some kind of global surveys that have shown that 75% of them are frightened about the future, and about 65% feel betrayed by their government. So that's kind of like, oh, it's a gut punch, I think, for any parent or anyone who likes kids, that they've sort of been dismissed, or that they're just sort of Gen Z complainers. And you live in a wealthy country, and what's your problem? And so I think the big thing to take away is that this is, the feelings are real here, and we have to, as adults and sort of older generations, really try and right the wrongs that are taking place. Like, it's going to be more of their future than it is mine and yours, right? And so they're going to have to be dealing with this for a lot longer. And I think this is a generation that, for the first time ever, may look to their future with that fear of environmental doom, as it's sort of defined as, like, I didn't have that when I was 10, 11, 12, or 15 or 16. It's terrible that that's, a lot of young people have that perspective. 40% are choosing not to have kids because of climate change. I mean, that's really sad to see. So I think
That's a
taking it
lot. Yeah.
seriously, and validating, this is a survey that was done in like 10,000 youth in 9 countries. So it's not just a US phenomenon. This is a global phenomenon.
Well, I'm going to jump ahead because you touched on it, and then I'm going to come back to where I was going with the questions that I sent to you originally.
Hmm.
So, the concept here is bridging that generational gap, right? There's often a tension between boomer optimism or maybe Gen X optimism and Gen Z urgency. And so, you touched on it. I think we grew up in a world where we were just taught to like, don't worry about it, don't worry about it, everything will be fine. And I'm 57 going on 58. I don't know what you are, but you're older than 16 or 18 years old, right? So how do we as parents or mentors reach higher in our communication to bridge this gap without dismissing the youth's lived experience?
Yeah, I think it's a real, yeah, I wish I was still younger, although I don't know if I
I'll
really
take
want to
my
still be
wisdom,
young.
experience, and the fact that I have a
Yeah,
little more comfortable of a life, but that's
right,
just
right.
me.
But maybe a bit of the physicality of a 20-year-old would be
That
pretty
that
good.
is one where it's like I could stand to be, Jason Tatum's age, who just came back
Yeah,
after a ruptured Achilles after 10 months of healing. Take me a little bit longer than
totally.
10 months, I think.
For sure, for sure. But I think it's a big issue, right? If we look at surveys of who believes in climate change the most, it's Gen Z and young people, and boomers the least. So there's a real disconnect there. And young people do blame boomers for the climate crisis. I do think that's a little unfair. I think we've all lived and grown up in what some climate scholars call kind of being a climate hostage. Like, we didn't choose this life. We don't have any other option for the most part, right, than to consume fossil fuel driven energy or transportation. it's not like we have a choice really. And so, but I think it's that generation, the boomer generation, has been slow to act. And obviously now with the current administration, they're really doing their darndest to repeal anything that's connected to climate change. There's some really great organizations. You may be familiar with Bill McKibben. He's a big kind of environmental person in the climate space, kind of a climate celebrity. He has an organization called Third Act, which is actually specifically working with those over 60 to address and deal with climate change. And what's great about it is they try and get that generation to connect with young generation. And so to help young people see that there are actually older people who care and are doing a lot. And so I think that's an important step. I think that collaboration between elderly generation that have wisdom and young people who may have energy and vision can be particularly powerful. And then in that context, I think, giving youth leadership opportunity in working with older folks so that they're just not being kind of talked down to or all kind of we know best type of thing. So I think there's a lot of shared values too that, age can make opaque, but a lot of these older people who care about the environment have been environmental stewards for generations or decades, and can really connect with a 19-year-old who really cares about their watershed in their town. So I think there's real common ground here to kind of connect, younger people with an older generation. But I think there is the reality of some of the resentment there in the sense that they've been dismissed, which I do think we have to pay attention to.
Yeah, and I guess just to build on that, there's this concept of like validation versus catastrophizing. I say that 15 times fast. Catastrophizing. Thank you. I knew that I got it wrong even on that second time. So how do we help young people find the balance between acknowledging this very real data of climate change without falling into a state of doomism or paralysis? Because I think it's kind of like, if you're doing life saving, which may sound like a funny analogy, but one of the things you learn is like if you're going out to rescue someone, they're thrashing and flailing, and they will want to grab onto you. And the problem is if they grab onto you too quickly, they can sink both of you.
Right.
And so sometimes you actually have to like push them off of you or slide them off of you to give them a minute and let them know that like I'm here to help, but I can't let you drown me because then both of us will drown, right? So I feel like there's a little bit of that with this generation where you can't let them be so paralyzed with fear or so downtrodden that they're saying I'm not going to have children because why would I? Like, how do you bridge that gap and find that common ground?
Yeah, I think it's a really good analogy to use our metaphor there for sure. I think of catastrophic thinking as the difference between having effective coping tools and not having effective coping tools, right? Because anxiety is not inherently a bad emotion. It can have some real utility to it, right? If a lion's running at you, you need to your heart needs to race, you need to feel scared to run out of the way. But if you're so anxious and scared, you're paralyzed, the lion's going to get you. So I think it's this idea that anxiety about the climate is really, and I talked a little bit about this to Change Your Simple talk, is normal, is actually probably healthy. It really suggests that you love the planet, right? You love animals, you love nature. So out of that love comes some worry and concern for the future. And so, but if we don't help kids learn how to deal with that anxiety and channel it in a way that is healthy coping using, some mental health strategies, some engagement with nature, some mindfulness, some cognitive reframing, as we say in the psychology biz, to kind of channel that sense of doom, that people will feel paralyzed. And I think that's our biggest problem is that sense of helplessness and hopelessness. Like, who am I? I'm one person. What difference does it make if I don't eat red meat on a Friday, right? So that's a kind of like our bigger sense of challenge, is how to engage people when it is such a big nebulous problem so that they feel empowered and a bit of in control. Too much anxiety is bad, right? It leads to that flailing and the sinking potential. So I think that's the thing that I really want to work on is building resilience in youth so that they are able to cope with the anger, the fear, the resentment in a way that doesn't lead them to disengage, that doesn't lead them to feel paralyzed and stuck, that actually results in kind of action and activism, because that's really what we need to do.
Well, I love that answer. And I think you said something really important, which we forget, that some of these reactions, like anxiety, are natural. It's okay to actually do that, right? It is okay to have it, but you do need the tools. And this is sort of Psych 101, as you alluded to. But I think starting with that ground of like, this is okay. This is obviously there are unhealthy doses of it, and that may need
Right.
medication, but not thinking that every sort of aspect of anxiety is a bad thing. I do want to talk
Yeah.
about something because you talked about this, and these are, I think, some of the tools. And Change is Simple, which was the organization you were just sort of speaking on behalf. They have something that's a mobile lab. It's SCILL or Skill to make science fun. And I really like this idea. I was a science nerd growing up, and
Same.
did laboratories inside and out. Not shocked, especially you mentioned the biology, right? But from a psychological perspective, why is hands-on interactive learning more effective at building emotional resilience than a traditional classroom lecture? Not to say one is better than the other, but obviously there are benefits there to doing the hands-on piece.
Yeah, yeah, I agree. I think, hands-on with kids, and some people are doing work with middle school and younger kids, but yeah, having something tangible, having something that they can do, sort of bringing their problem solving into something they can visually see. Kids are pretty concrete, and if we talk in abstract, and what's more abstract on some level than climate change, right? It's this sort of hyper object, and it's kind of hard to define or even see it really. And so giving kids, I do some mindfulness walks in parks and forests with kids. I have them connect with nature objects and why does this nature object stand out for you? I kind of did that same thing at Change is Simple, actually, with all the adults. But giving them something tangible, like this specific coping skill can help when you are stressed. You can write it out. You can even a stress ball, or you can connect with others. But really having them join with each other and start to identify some tangible things they can do locally, and that can be in their school, it can be in their home, um, that's moving towards solutions. We have to really move away from problem identification and stress about the problem to real solutions and start to act and do things. Otherwise, we are going to get, that stuck in that paralysis stuff. So, yeah, definitely getting kids active, playing together. If climate work or resiliency building is not fun, they're not going to do it, right? We have to
Right.
find our joy. We have to find something that's joyful. And what's better to see a kid laughing, and what helps their learning the most if they're running around together and solving puzzles and using kind of tangible things in front of you. So I would agree with that approach for sure.
Well, it's interesting, and I'm trying this new experiment of sort of cross-referencing some of the past episodes. And I may have even sent this to you in my original note. So most recently, I had a gentleman named Don Reed, who's an actor and a comedian, and he does this storytelling in the redwoods, and it's really sort of getting back to this original experiencing things in the woods with a glass of wine, if you're old enough, putting your phone down. And it brought to mind these two other former guests, one of which was Adrian Grenier, the actor who was in Entourage and Devil Wears Prada. And I was just re-listening to his episode, and he talked about like getting hands in dirt, right? And just like
Yes.
breathing in the air and just how
Yes.
cathartic that can be. And then Chuck Leavell,
Yeah.
who's the keyboardist for the Rolling Stones, he's a famous conservationist, helped create the Mother Nature Network. And so he talked about, sort of doing these projects like having green space and
Yeah.
gardening and doing things like
Yeah.
that. And just, I think we forget. Look, I use a phone or a computer as much as the next guy, right? I'm a sort of digital reborn, but you do forget just how nice it is to go out sometimes and experience, like, look at the beauty around you. We were talking about the fact that it's spring, all these flowers, and breathe in the air and look at the
Yeah.
sky. And
Yeah.
it can have such a medicinal impact on you. And I think people forget
100%.
sometimes that that's the thing.
Yeah, 100%. I'm actually doing a research study with some colleagues to um, create a kind of therapeutic garden and horticultural space in a residential program for youth with substance use who are unhoused. And so we're going to do a planting day. We're going to get them actually in the dirt, like you said, their hands dirty. And then we're going to measure like how does this help them feel and what are the benefits to them. But yeah, just being, and I live in a city, a real dense city, and most people do. And so our disconnection with nature, I think, is part of the issue that we're challenged with, right? That people aren't able to access green space or parks depending on where you live. We don't have great access to sort of state parks or national forests. And I think we need to reconnect with nature to really love and protect it, right? We protect what we love. And I think that's, so I love to hear stories about people getting into nature and forest walks and forest bathing and all that cool stuff.
Yeah, no, I think it's just so critically important. Um, I think it's always helpful to be grounded in data, right? I want to talk a little bit about something called the data of hope, because having things grounded in data research, I think, is always strengthens the argument, right? It can always be helpful. So, what has your current research into 6th to 12th graders revealed that has surprised you most about their emotional maturity regarding global issues? Because I think people will probably be surprised to hear this.
Yeah, I was super fortunate to be able to be part of this study, that it's actually a study looking at addiction and correlates of addiction in this group. And we were able to kind of include some stuff on climate related worry and distress. And we really were looking to see in this age group, 6 through 12, how many of them are worried about climate. We don't have great data on young kids. So sixth graders, seventh and eighth graders, we don't have great understanding. Most of the studies are in 16 plus. We also don't get a sense of, to your point earlier, around how many are impaired by their worry, right? So how many kids, if it's normative to be anxious about your planet, but for how many is it really a problem, right? Their anxiety is really intense, or really, really they need help. We don't have a great sense of how many feel they can cope with this. So what was surprising in our data was just how many sixth graders reported that they don't really know how to cope with climate distress. I thought we just wouldn't get really great answers, or it would be mostly just sort of check no, and but I was sort of surprised how, we found 49% of sixth through eighth graders never or almost always, sorry, never or rarely felt they had ways to cope with climate distress. And about 40% felt they experienced climate worry. Fortunately, only about 10 to 15% are impaired by that worry, but that is still a high number. When we think about 10% of 6th through 12th graders are impaired by climate worry on a daily basis. Like, I was a bit surprised by that number, to be honest. We're still crunching the numbers and are kind of writing up the paper as we speak, specifically looking at, like, who are these kids? Like, who's at risk for climate worry? We don't really have great characterization of who was struggling the most, right? With the ideal goal to kind of target those kids and build resiliency in those, because we don't need to kind of fix everybody, because a lot of people are doing okay with it, but for some it's getting in their way. Another finding which we're scratching our heads on is that kids who had higher rates of other types of anxiety said that they had better ways to cope with climate worry. So we don't really know what that means. So it could be that they're applying some of the skills to deal with regular anxiety to climate worry, and so they're kind of transferring them, but we don't really know yet. So
That is an
that's what's cool
interesting
about
one.
research. Yeah.
Do you have a sense of when this will be done and when it will be? Where could people go to find it? And I would ask you, if you're willing, send me a note, and I can either update the podcast with the show link when that goes live, and I certainly do social posts around this, so I'll make sure that I include those ex post facto. But
I really appreciate that. Thank you so much. We are writing the paper now, so let's see, probably, how slow the academic journals wheels turn. So my guess is we'll come, hopefully, if it gets accepted, come out later fall, maybe early next year, because these peer reviews take forever. So, but I really appreciate the opportunity to highlight the paper once it's out there. So yeah.
of course. Well, and so people are tracking along. This episode is scheduled to drop on Friday the 13th of March of 2026. And so you may be hearing this and it will have been a while by the time it comes out. But I think this is an evergreen topic, and that will give people something to look forward to and to dig into. And obviously the peer review is critically important to validate that all the
Yep.
steps have been taken correctly.
Yep.
And, if there are actions that sort of happen as a result of it, then we're doing it correctly as well. I do want to ask one more sort of serious question, and then we'll get into lighter. I don't know if they're fun, because when I ask you things like what your biggest regret, that's definitely not fun, but a little more frivolous questions after this one. But I want to talk a little bit about scaling impact. And so if you could implement one mental health resource or curriculum change in every school district tomorrow to address climate distress, what would that look like?
Oh my God, I wish I had that power. That'd be so amazing.
Well, maybe you'll
Um,
get it after this paper is
yeah, maybe
published.
so. Hopefully people give me lots of grant money to do that. Um, I think, we don't, this is kind of a weird thing to say as a researcher per se, but we don't need to know more about the problem of climate change. We know it's a bad problem, right? We know there's bad carbon, it's problematic, nature's going down. I think what we do need, to my point earlier, was really the coping resilience building that really is often not per se part of climate related education. Change is simple is great. They're doing some of that stuff as well. But that's because that's the crux for me, right? If you're stressed or anxious, about a conversation today, like it can lead to paralysis and you can feel stuck, and then that's no good. And so if giving kids the tools so that they can adapt, they can appropriately grieve the loss of, nature. We can't sugarcoat this. But if they have ways to grieve effectively that don't lead to, you know, doomerism or stuckness, that 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 can really unlock a lot of potential, um, and keep people moving forward and have that energy. This is not going to be solved in 2 years, 5 years. This is a long-term issue, and so we certainly need just ways to kind of keep moving forward because it's easy to fall into that and put your head in the sand and, you know, yeah.
Let me ask you a bigger than a bread box question that I did not give to you. So if you want to punt on it, you can. We're bombarded with this whole idea of AI, right? AI has actually been around for a long time, but generative AI brought to us by the likes of Claude, ChatGPT, Copilot,
Right.
et cetera, are in everybody's hands. And it's like a first for this, and they're advancing at a rapid rate. So this isn't your primary area of focus, but it deeply impacts what you do as on a day-to-day basis, which is actually fixing the climate, right? And we know that
Right.
our current administration, to your point, isn't doing a lot to actually help us do that. Is there
Mm-mm.
a world, do you think, where the advancement of AI and the focus of a lot of our friends in the Gen Y and Gen Z areas and millennials and Gen Z areas will have the tools in the next 5 to 10 years? And I know the clock is ticking, so maybe we're out of time, but we could have a potentially profound change that we don't know about today, probably do not know about today, that could change things. Like, do you think that's possible? And like, how long would that take? Is it a 2 or 3 year thing? Is it a 3 to 5 year thing, 5 to 10 year thing where we might see a breakthrough that we just couldn't predict right now that will have a foundational saving impact on our environment?
It makes me think of a lot of things. I mean, first, my answer is just God, I hope so. Like,
And obviously we all think
please,
that, but
right,
again, like you're
right,
more of
right,
an expert on this stuff than a lot of other people are.
right.
So
Like, God, I hope so. I will say, though, we already know the solutions, right? So, what we're talking a little bit about, which is maybe not the most amazing answer, but techno fixes, right? This idea that some future technology will fix this. We're seeing this with carbon capture and storage. It's just not panning out. But we already know what to do. Solar, wind, renewables. It's not that hard. We just need momentum, political momentum, and global movement towards this direction. Like, it's not that we don't know what to do. It's just it's not scaled and we don't have political will. And so I think if AI can think of some amazing way to get politicians to change their minds, maybe some like psychological strategies and skills, that may be our best shot. But we kind of already know what to do, to be honest with you. It's just getting it to be done that is our challenge. But yeah, I don't know what I don't know. It might invent some incredible carbon capture and you know chemistry set thing that sucks all the carbon out the air and we're good. But I think it also focuses on carbon dioxide as our biggest issue, but we're also seeing nature degradation, right? Loss of ecosystems that is connected to carbon dioxide, but is also to do with consumerism. And so while we may reduce CO2 production through more efficient ways, we also have to figure out our consumerism issues and taking away land and all that kind of stuff. So there's my complex answer off the cuff. So hopefully that's
Well, you
yeah.
you said something really important that actually it's a no duh, but I think we forget how simple it is. And that is it starts with politics. And there is a saying that all politics are local politics.
Right.
And I'd say anyone listening to this, vote locally,
Yeah.
take action, do things, again, this is Adrian Grenier was saying, like get in your dirt locally or do things that are sort of grassroots locally. And those can bubble up. And I do feel like that the Gen Z do have this
Yeah.
civic responsibility that maybe we lost our way with, and that they will be the voice of change as we go forward. And so I can definitely see that being a bigger solution.
Yeah.
And I love that you said we already know the answers. It's not like AI is magically going to help us, but maybe they do magically help us find ways to stop gerrymandering and,
Yeah. Right. All those things.
going
Yeah,
against
exactly.
things that we shouldn't be doing. All right, let's go to some of the lighter questions now that we've solved all of the world's problems here. What show or podcast are you binging right now? Ideally something lighter or funnier, or at least not documentary style.
So unsurprisingly, I love nature and I'm a big gardener actually. And so I have my British garden show called Gardeners Question Time that I listen to every week religiously. It's been going on for like 80 years and it's really cute and it's makes me feel really good. And people call in with questions about gardening and I don't know. It just does it for me.
I love it. I love to garden too, so I might have to pick it up. We'll put a link to that in the show notes.
Yeah. Lots of British accents, British humor.
I mean, you could do worse than that, right? So out of any of the amazing people you've ever met in your life, who has impressed you the most?
I'm gonna cheat here. These are two people because I was thinking about this question that I really God wish I get to meet. So one is my all-time favorite hero, David Attenborough. Not surprising, right?
Yep. Mm-hmm.
Brought nature into people's homes, made me fall in love with nature, and just is sort of just an incredible guy. About to turn 100, so my time is probably running out to meet him, but you never know. So he would be one I'd love to meet. And then one person I met recently. So I volunteer for what's called IFAR, which is the International Fund for Wildlife, and we rescue stranded dolphins on Cape Cod, and so it's all volunteers and there's staff and stuff like that. But this volunteer who's, I don't know, like 85, 90. He has he probably has Parkinson's, he has a cane, and he is at every response and he totally mucks in. He's in his wellies in the mud in Wellfleet, which is like brutal mud, and he's kind of inspiring. Like I hope I am that engaged and volunteering and civic at that point and just moving forward despite some physical challenges. He's kind of an inspiration. So those guys, I would say.
Well, that's great. And for anyone that wasn't tracking, I know James gave a little context, but Attenborough is the guy that if you've ever watched one of these like beautiful, world documentaries, he is the voice, that very ASMR background voice. My youngest daughter is 18, jokes about the fact that she could just listen to him and help her go to sleep because he's got such a soothing rhythm, but just brilliant and helps bring these things alive. So great answers. I really love that, James. Thanks. 2 more questions left. The next one, a little heavier, but sort of helps people better understand who you are. Biggest regret in your life?
I would probably say, and I thought a lot about this, I wish I was just sometimes less self-conscious. Like, cared a little bit less about what other people think a lot of the time. I think people can probably relate to that, and that's probably why anxiety management is interesting to me. Right? That, like, if I could spend less time worrying about what other people thought, I think I would have just been a little bit easier, especially as a teenager and young adult. I think that's also why I like to work with this group, because so I would say my biggest regret is not having as much anxiety coping skills as I would like.
Well, I appreciate the vulnerability and the transparency there, and I think probably a lot of us feel that same way, but you at least have the self-awareness around it to potentially help it over your next 50 or 60 years on this planet, right? Last question. And this is one that I'm always curious to find out how the guests answer it. But a band or artist, ideally one that you could no longer see or that is no longer around, that you would have most liked to have seen.
Yeah, I'm a jazz fan, so I would say any of the great ladies. So probably Nina Simone would be top for me, maybe Diana Washington, and then I recently got into Alice Coltrane, who's kind of amazing too. So I would say any of those three would be really amazing to have been able to see in live or in concert, right? I think the ladies of jazz are awesome.
Well, we've not had any of those as answers before, so I love that you took a unique path. All amazing artists as well. I'm a big fan. And so maybe we'll link out to the ladies as well in the show notes. So with that, we will wrap up. James, thank you so much for taking the time to do this. Thank you for doing what you're doing to help our youth and to calm them, to work them through their addiction and all of the things that we need more people like you doing. So bless you for the work you do.
Thank you so much. I really appreciate that. It means a lot. And thanks for giving me a moment to talk about this and this work. So thanks for all you do too.
Well, thanks. I appreciate it.